I've met many skeptics in my life, being in the paranormal, talking to them personally. They would tell me their stories. And of course, there was that air around it that I don't really believe in this stuff. There must have been a natural solution for it. But that's not all skeptics. So I find some skeptics are just very closed down to it, just more of the scientific thinkers. Some are open to the idea of ghosts, but in the end, it's not something they really care about or deem to or want to look into more. But the one that always fascinated me the most is my favorite type of skeptic, is the one that doesn't want to believe because if ghosts were real, it would terrify them. And I love that. And I tell you that some of the best stories have come from those people because they're scared of it, yes, but they're also fascinated by it. So you really, in a way, you can't call them skeptics. Maybe skeptical because of fear. Now, either way, when it comes to believing in ghosts, I always said that you need to avoid the extremes. If you're too much of a skeptic, you'll be completely closed down. And if somebody tells you a ghost story, you might laugh it off. You might make fun of it. There's been a lot of times that I tell these amazing ghost stories, including the ones that I personally experienced, and then somebody laughs. I understand the feeling. That it hurts. It hurts a little bit. I'll just say you get the feels, but not the good ones. So you can be too much of a skeptic and be completely closed down to it. But here's the thing: like, don't think I'm just gonna say out there you must believe or else. You don't have to be a believer. You don't have to be 100% in the camp that ghosts are real and every little thing that's strange is a ghost doing it. I think the extremes on both ends are wrong. Because if you're too skeptical, you're going to be closed down to anything that might happen to you. But if you're too much of a believer, you're going to be open to everything, whether it be natural or actually paranormal. And this is not a help to the supernatural community at all. The supernatural community needs real ghost stories. Because those who are skeptical, just like slightly on the fence, if they hear these ghost stories that are believable, that do fit the idea of ghosts not being this horror movie stereotype, but instead being something that is, that is more subtle. So it's energy, leftover energy, whether it be conscious, whether it be residual. Either way, it comes down to energy. So being too skeptical, being too much of a believer, not good for the world of the paranormal. But there's that middle sweet spot. And this is why it is good to have some skepticism. Now, I've had many experiences over the years, not hundreds, maybe a dozen. And I'm not psychic, so these things don't naturally come to me. And I always found that if I questioned what was happening, that it would just give me more of a validity to it. If I just believed wholeheartedly in everything, I would have missed some very easy clues, because the mind works kind of in a strange way. If you do believe something completely, your mind tends to shut off everything that goes against it. So having that little bit of skepticism to take the time to question what had just happened to you only makes the experience stronger. You'll remember it for much longer because there's not a huge amount of them that are taking up your mental space. And it's just a better story to tell. Like, here's an example, somebody who believes too much. Somebody told me a story once that said that the ghosts in their house washes their dishes. And I was like, I don't know about that one. Nothing against that, and I'm sure they had some type of experience, but to affect the material in such a way and to do such a inane chore as washing the dishes, that seems a little bit too over the top. And the other one that kind of hits me is the idea of orbs. Now, I'll come back to that in a moment, but I just want to touch on the idea of ghost shows here. I really hope I'm not hitting a nerve with this one, but I've had some personal experience with these ghost shows. I was part consultant, part on-air talent for the show Creepy Canada. Going back a bunch of years ago, my 15 minutes of fame was the Hermitage ruins. I got to tell my story about seeing the shadows. I still remember how the director, the producer slash director, was pushing me to be more dramatic. It's like, no, the way you approach the woods, don't just look lackadaisical. Show emotion. You're scared. Don't forget you're scared. It's like, is this what it's like to be an actor? Or I guess if I was an actor, I would know to do that automatically. But I digress. So the ghost shows, in sense, they use something. Now, I didn't see this personally with Creepy Canada, as a side note, although Creepy Canada, I know with some of the shows we did, they did write in a couple of stories that were like over-the-top experiences. So with them, I didn't have a lot of confidence, and this was something that was done after the fact. So I would come in, I would use some of my knowledge of different ghost stories, and they would feature it on a show at a location. And sometimes that didn't round out the show, so they needed to add something. Now, I don't know who was adding these. Some of them I just thought were a little bit too much. But either way, faking the ghost story is just not a good idea in general. But Creepy Canada is a legendary show. I don't know for the right reasons, but it did pretty well. So with most ghost shows, they can write in stuff, but this doesn't really fit the ghost shows where they go do the investigation. So then when they're doing the investigation, not everything is going to happen at once. Sometimes when you're doing a paranormal investigation, that it could take days of going back in complete patience to get the smallest experience. But that's not going to be good for a TV show. So I understand their point of view. I mean, they need to get people to watch the show, otherwise it gets canceled. So they can write in some stuff, maybe to fill in the blanks, but they also use something known as dramatization. Now, this is another show that I worked with. Again, I'm not going to mention all of the shows, but just let's say the ones that I work with, they're not on the air right now. But this other one that I did work with gave me an idea of it. They were investigating a haunted hotel, and there was this one story in the bedroom. I think the people staying over, they told a story about having a towel that appeared out of nowhere on the bed. Like something took the towel out of the bathroom and stuck it on the end of the bed when they had left the room for a little bit and came back. So here we have a story, right, that was told to the producers. This is an actual experience, but it didn't happen on camera. Now, they could go on the camera and say, this is a dramatization, that this did not happen for us in person, but that is a story being told. Or they can go the more compelling route of presenting it as a real experience and not telling you it's a dramatization. So that is one technique, where they'll show it happening in the moment, they'll fake it, but it is based on a real story. So, the location, the consultants, like I was, they're not really going to bat an eye to that because of the fact that it is a real story. So it's not just straight out lying. Although there is other techniques that are a little bit more devious. And I'll tell you one. This was shown in a show that I loved. There was a show called Extreme Paranormal. It didn't last long enough. I think it was like 3 episodes. I covered it on a previous podcast. But there was a technique that they used that's calling scaring the talent. And they made it a little too obvious in that one, where you'll have the talent, you have the investigators in a location. In this case, it was an old prison. And in the distant darkness, you make a noise. So one of the grips, one of the producers, somebody in the crew will slam something against the wall or roll steel over the prison bars, and they'll make this noise in the distance. They won't tell the talent that they're doing it, right? So that when the talent reacts to it, it is a very natural reaction. So it's almost Oscar worthy. I mean, if these people were actors, you would give them the Oscar. And that way then they move as if this noise was real. So I don't know if they ever told the talent that, if afterwards maybe they came to them and said, hey, guess what? We made a huge noise in the distance. Great reaction. You did wonderful. I mean, me just saying that right now, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, I mentioned about being more skeptical with your experiences. So the question you might be thinking at this moment is, how do I do that? So it really comes down to a question. So you've had something happen to you, something spooky, something unexplainable. The first thing you need to ask, and you can get in the habit of doing this right away, is there anything normal or natural that could cause this to happen? I've asked that question 100 times in my life, and I always get an answer. That's the thing, right? So you ask that question, is there anything normal or natural that could cause it to happen? And then your brain starts working. So it kind of goes past that cutoff. If you're a huge believer in the paranormal, you'll stop ignoring the obvious signs. And I know it's not as exciting in the moment, but it will be very exciting if the answer to the question is that it's a no. That is there any normal or natural? The answer is no. Then you have something real. But the point is you have taken the time to kind of sit back and think about it. And I've done this with many experiences where I've heard or saw something I couldn't explain. And the ones that ended up after the fact, they've been put through the ringer, are now ones that will stick in my mind for the rest of my life. And the orb photo is a great example of this. I'll give you a story. There was an orb photo that was sent to me a few years ago, and it was like orbs throughout the photo. You couldn't even see what was really behind the photo because it was so many orbs. And that's usually a shot right there to its validity, because if you get an orb photo, 1, 2, they're usually very bright. And there's a story that comes with it, like some type of experience that you had in the moment. But when you get ones that are just peppered with orbs, then you got to ask that question. So I look at the photo. I couldn't really see what was behind it because of all the orbs that blocked it. So I asked the question, well, okay, is there anything normal or natural about this orb photo? And nothing really came to me because I wasn't the one who took it. So finally I sent an email to the person who sent it to me. I was like, could you tell me, was there anything natural? For example, with orbs, you could have bugs. You could have moisture. Moisture is a huge one. Light flares from lights that are nearby, although I couldn't see any lights. And they were like, no. So then I asked them, oh, where were you? And they said they were at Albion Falls. Now, this is not at the top of the falls in the distance. This is right at the very bottom of the falls. So I was like, then I asked just for fun, was it raining? And guess what? It was raining as well. So you have moisture from the falls, you have moisture from the rain. It gets on the camera lens, and because it's so close to the lens itself, being so close to where the picture is taken, that it comes out looking like orbs. So orb photos, sadly, 95% of them have a natural solution. And by asking the question that I asked the person who took it, they can ask yourself, is there anything normal or natural that could have caused this?